It's been a while since we've been here.
It has been. Yep.
You've been doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Yeah, I think it's been like probably almost 8 weeks since we did a podcast.
Probably
Maybe
so.
It's
yes.
been a while.
Yes.
It's been a while.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, so they're gonna see new episode like, what are you talking about?
I thought they were dead.
I thought they were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, for those that don't know, Paul and I did a little traveling over the end of the summer. We were both kind of gone, and then Paul took a sabbatical for October, so that's why we haven't been out here. And this is awesome because this is your first sabbatical that you've had. I'm gonna be taking mine in January for the first time. Mm-hmm. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to just kind of talk about that, unpack a little bit of that, about that. Like what did you expect going into it? Mm-hmm. How was it? And kind of what did you learn from it? So I guess those three things, like what did you expect? How did it go? What did you learn? And what's your takeaway from it on the back end?
Yeah, like you said, I never really had a sabbatical. Never really had much vacation over 20 years of ministry as being a lead pastor. And so in that time, through all the ups and downs of ministry, you develop a lot of scars. I mean, ministry in itself is great. Like the fact that you are in partnership with God to change people's lives is a very, very rewarding thing to do. Mm-hmm. And there's been many successes where I could look back and say, man, that was great to be a part of that. I'll see what God did there. But also when you're dealing with people in ministry, you're also setting yourself up for great hurt. And I mean, because people are flawed and people are messed up, and those flaws and that mess always comes to the top as throughout your ministry, dealing with different people, different seasons of their life. And so for me, going into my first sabbatical to be able to take a month off was a little weird for me because I didn't really know what totally to expect. I expected rest. Mm-hmm. I expected to be able to disengage mentally. I expected to really find some time to just reconnect maybe personally in my relationship with God and just outside of my calling to ministry, but also to get a new perspective for my next season of ministry. Mm-hmm. Because at my age, I'm 55 years old, I got a lot more time left. But the reality is I got less time left than what I have already served in ministry. Mm-hmm. And so when you get to that point, you start to think about, okay, what do I want this next season of ministry to look like? It's going to be different than the first season. My first season of ministry was all about leading through change as a young leader and trying to learn how to lead and trying to learn all the things of that. And so the next season is going to be different. It's going to be more of how do we go to the next level? How do we build new teams? How do we build new leaders? How do we all those things for me it's a different level of ministry going forward. So I felt like it was going to be a redirection and a perspective building time for that going into it. And then my wife and I were going to take a vacation in the middle of it to spend some time together. So I felt like it was going to be a reconnecting time for us because prior to that, I had been through a really busy season, a really stressful season, both here and personally. And so for me, I just knew it was a great window of time for me to just totally unplug and disconnect from the responsibilities of life in every way, and to just really have time of intentional reflection without the day-to-day pressures of taking the deposit to the bank and, sitting through staff meetings and sitting through other meetings, like all that stuff that we deal with here. And so that was kind of what I thought it was going to be going into it. What it ended up being was, I think, much more than that for me. I had shared with the staff, throughout the time, in preparation for my sabbatical, I really began to think about, okay, well, from a spiritual renewal perspective, where do I want to be in Scripture during that time? And I really felt like God was clearly directing me to 1 Peter. And so I probably read it 10 or so times over my sabbatical. And one of the passages where, kind of at the end of the book, where it's in the context of church leadership. And Peter writes that this idea that after you've suffered for a little while, that God's going to restore you, he's going to confirm you, he's going to strengthen you, and he's going to establish you. Like those 4 things. And so I really meditated a lot on those 4 aspects of God's work in me, like from the inside out. And so I shared that with my wife early, and so we had some great conversations about it, what it looked like for us personally. And so I think that there was some past hurts in ministry that I was able to deal with, able to kind of set aside, able to move on from some things I hadn't really thought about in years. I tried to meditate on and really move past and really get some clarity from it. And then also began to turn my attention to what's next. And God really, I think, began to show me some things there. My wife and I had a fantastic trip. We went up to Maine and Nova Scotia. She and I had never done anything like that. The longest vacation we ever had was like maybe a week at Myrtle Beach, when the kids were younger. And I would preach on both ends of that vacation. And so having the time away to just, totally disengage from anything here. We didn't listen to the services. I mean, my wife, we listened to one on the way up, and I just, immediately my wheels started to turn, my ministry leadership wheels. And I just told her, I just can't do that. Like for this month, I'm not Pastor Paul. Like I'm just Paul. And so I think that was extremely healthy. Coming out of it, my wife said, I feel like I'm closer to you. And so I think for both of us, we felt that. So I think it was healthy for my marriage, healthy for my capacity for what is to come and the work that is to come in ministry going forward, my energy for it, my focus for it. I think perspective is better. So I think that's kind of, in general, I would say what my takeaway was.
Most people that work in any type of career, they don't really have a sabbatical written into it, right? Like, for pastors and some other professions, like every 7 years, taking one. Being in ministry for 20 years, not having a sabbatical, and coming off your first one, why do you think, like, what would you tell somebody that doesn't have that, or why do you think in this profession that it's necessary, or that it's recommended?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think number one, American culture is different from a lot of cultures.
Okay.
European culture, they go on holiday a lot. Like there's a lot of vacations.
It's
so
just built in.
It's just built in.
Yeah, correct.
Culturally for us, it's a little bit different. The grind, is is a little more hard on us here in America, and I think that has permeated the Protestant church world here. Mm-hmm. And I also think that maybe our past church structures have limited the ability of pastors to take sabbaticals and staff people to take sabbaticals because, you look around and who else is going to do it if you're not here. But I think you just got to make those sacrifices. You got to figure that out. Why is it more recommended maybe for the pastoral role than somebody who's running an electrical company or something else?
Right.
I just don't, it's really hard to put into words, and for people that have never experienced it, the emotional toll of being in ministry, in particular in the lead pastor role. There's conversations that we have with people about their broken marriages. There's conversations that we have with people about their children who are in just deep mess. There's conversations that we have with people in the midst of the depth of huge grief. And so there's all of that. And then on top of that, there's the weekly responsibility of standing up and proclaiming from the scriptures information and hopefully stuff that's going to change people's eternity. And that the moments where you're filled with the Spirit and then you empty that, like what's left is less than what you started with. And so like
did you feel like you're just
up and down,
a husk, bro?
And I'm just saying, I always thought about it in terms of like at our pier where my family has a house down at White Lake, like the post will rot.
Yeah.
They won't rot quickly. Under the water, they never rot. Above the water, they rot, but they rot slowly. Where they rot the most quickly is where the water line is. where the wood cells get wet and dry, wet and dry, wet and dry, and it's that.
So staying wet permanently actually doesn't rot the wood.
Oh, they'll be there forever.
So that is not what it does.
Yeah.
It's actually the wet and dry.
It's the wet and dry,
That's
wet and dry,
crazy.
wet and dry.
That's crazy.
And then the UV from the sun.
Yeah.
But it's the wet and dry, and in that point, that's where the weakest point will be. And if you look at a post, wherever the water line is, if it's going to rot, it's going to be eroded in that place.
That's crazy.
And so, but that's what we do in ministry. Like we're wet and we're dry, wet and dry, wet and dry, wet and dry. And so it will wear you out.
Yeah.
Like and that spiritual and emotional roller coaster, it has physical ramifications.
It does.
Yeah. And so I think that's why rest is so important.
Yeah, I just people like psychologists, just social workers, law enforcement, military, like people who have high stress jobs. I think they just need to take time, just to be the best they can in those areas. I early on felt that I had some misconceptions about ministry that, man, I'm just, like you said, I'm so honored to be able to do this. I'm so honored to be called. And I am, and still am. And I feel people, you just feel honored. Whenever you understand your giftedness and you get an opportunity to use your giftedness, you feel this little bit of feeling honored to do it, right? Like, oh my gosh, you're going to ask me to come do my passion? That's just, it's amazing, right? That's kind of why I have such a hard time with some of these sports players. Like, let me take a side note. I can't stand James Harden. Like in this same vein, I can't stand James Harden. I despise, because the thing about it is I was in Arizona when he was there.
Okay.
And so I've kind of been around Harden, like hearing when he's at ASU.
He's a player in the National Basketball Association
I'm
for people
sorry.
who don't understand who James Harden is.
Oh my gosh. Just Google it, okay? Just
come
take
on.
the phone out of your pocket and Google James Harden. They could have gotten it.
It's a beard.
Let them-
That's a lot involved.
So good. I love that. Yeah, the beard.
The beard.
Yeah, just Google the beard.
yeah.
You'll get that. Okay.
Yeah.
So James Harden was at ASU, played basketball down there. Awesome. Just had a really good start to his career. Went to Oklahoma City, the Thunder, another basketball team. Was come off the bench with Kevin. It was really good. And just over time, man, he's just become so selfish and just been about himself. And the thing what I'm pointing at is that he forgets that he gets paid a lot of money to play a game, and people get to come watch him. And he's lost almost that honor of like, man, I get to play this game that I love. And so like for ministry, we get to play this game that we love. But on the back end, man, it does require something of you. And I mean, I told you that, we've been together for 4.5 years now. And before that, each and every one of us, we did probably 48 to 50 Sundays a week, a year. But then so quickly when that transpired and I did 5 weeks in a row, dude, I was tired. Like I was like, I was kind of like, because generally speaking, I'm ready to go. Like we normally do 2 and 2.
Right.
So generally, you're ready to go. I'm ready to go. Like we're ready to go. Week 3, I was not ready to go, my friend. Week 4, I was kind of like, this. And then you weren't here to bounce ideas off of.
Right.
You weren't like, there was no like, it was all fell on me. And then it made me realize more how important the sabbatical is because you and I share the load. And I was like, man, these guys are out here humping every single day and there's nobody to even help the burden. They got to get that. So I was also thinking about just how you and I have both done ministry separately for so long, just the compound interest of the fatigue, maybe emotionally and physically. So you probably, as you were experiencing a sabbatical, you probably felt more fatigue rise. Like that's what happens when you're training, right? You go through and give yourself rest so that your fatigue can leave your body. And sometimes you realize at the end of that you were more tired than you thought you were.
Yeah, I think
Does that make any sense?
It's definitely an awareness of, wow, I didn't realize, because you just go to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so you don't really realize the toll that's taking.
Correct.
And how tired you actually are. I think that's true. I think that's 100% true. And I think now that we've built that into the culture of what we're going to be as a church, I think, future sabbaticals for me will probably be different.
And you'll be healthier.
And I'll be healthier when I go into that sabbatical.
1,000%.
There'll be a richness that goes into that when I come out of the end of it that's different than what I experienced this time. it was interesting about, the trying to unplug, trying to turn it off. And we talked a little bit about this, and I think this is true. Like it usually takes somebody like about 10 days to truly disengage, especially if you're in a leadership role, because you're thinking 24/7 about that organization, about that group, or whatever it is you're leading. And so to disengage from that,
even on vacation,
you're
still thinking about it.
So if you take a week vacation, you really just come back tired.
Yeah. Amen. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I mean, and my wife and I were talking about that. That in the past, we had some fun. Like
100%.
We'd go to the beach with the kids for a week, and we'd have some fun, or we'd go to the mountains or whatever. But it wasn't
recharging.
It wasn't recharging and rest, like true rest. And we both felt like, even while we were going on our trip, because we drove to Maine and Nova Scotia, took some ferries, and we just saw a lot of things. We drove over 3,300 miles across like 12 days. And so that's a lot of time in the car together, and it's a lot of miles, but man, we just felt so refreshed.
I'm surprised you made it back, bro.
When we got back,
man. Fresh leave you in Nova Scotia. You must have been on your best behavior.
It was great.
No, that's good. That's good.
It was really good.
It's fantastic.
Had some good food, saw some things that I just didn't believe existed. Just like, I'm used to going to the beach, and it just in North Carolina, we go from the mountains, and the state just gets flatter and flatter and flatter, and then there's sand, and then there's water. In Maine, it's just like there's mountains. Oh, there's water. It's just there's no flat.
So there's there's water in the valley. Then there's something like in the valley of the mountain. That's where the water. Because obviously it's not on top of the mountain, but
you're at the you walk. You're in a mountain, and then you drive to a cliff edge, and then there's water. It's not. Oh,
I understand.
It's all rocky and mountainy at the water.
I've never seen that either. Yeah, that's crazy.
Because you know how it is in North Carolina when you drive through the mountains. Like it's beautiful mountain scenery, and you might see a lake or a pond or a river.
Yes.
But like you just don't drive around a corner and there's the ocean.
No.
And that's what Maine was. And so and the beauty of that, like it's just crazy. It's just some of the things that we saw. And so just experiencing that as a believer, like to see the diversity of God's creation, the beauty of God's creation, the power of the waves and all the stuff that goes into that. That was fantastic.
And you were on your own time. And so I think for a longer period of time. And so we're not like God is beyond time. And I think that sometimes like we rarely get to experience life without the constraints of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what's good is like you always like you have a business, you have family, you have a granddaughter, you're in church, your friend. Like there's always something pulling at your time.
Yep.
So when you went on sabbatical, you were able to take yourself out and be like, we're gonna be where we're gonna be, when we're gonna be. And we're on nobody's time.
Right.
That is probably one of the most freeing things I would imagine. Also, that's what I'm looking forward to is the idea of escaping time. Like it doesn't matter. Like I'm not setting an alarm like that. That to me just seems beautiful.
Yeah, the only time we set an alarm, I think, was the day that we had to be at the ferry, at a certain date, certain time. And I think that was the only day because we knew we had to leave to get there. And I think the rest of the time there was no alarms. Like even after I got back, I had like another week and a half after I got back from the trip. Didn't set an alarm any day. Like that's
beautiful.
Hey, when you gonna get up? When I get up. And I usually it was not long after the sun came up. I'm up. And it was a lot of great time of just me sitting on the front porch watching the sun come up, hanging out with my dog, and my wife and I cooking lunch, hanging out together. It was just extremely refreshing. As my wife told me on Tuesday when I can't get ready to leave for staff meeting, she said, I'm really going to miss you because I enjoy having you around. And so that's really good to hear,
How do you feel this time? I know you talked a little about spiritually, but just in general, how do you feel this is going to propel you forward? Like what do you like, how do you feel it reset you a little bit now? Like from when you went on sabbatical to now, what do you feel is different that you're going to be able to bring back to your work?
I think energy and focus,
okay,
and attention, I think is the biggest thing.
Do you think you were aware that you had low energy and a lack of focus before you went on sabbatical?
Yeah, I was starting to feel it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were aware before.
There were some buckets that I knew were empty that I was still having to carry.
Okay.
And there were some things that I recognized and realized in my quiet time with the Lord during my sabbatical too. There were some things that you really haven't been doing this well.
Okay.
or like you've been slack here, or you've been deficient here in these areas. And so
That's never good when God brings that up to you, man. Like,
no, it's
I mean, it's good, but you know what I mean.
It's not
yeah.
pleasant.
Yes, yeah.
You're like, oh yeah. You're right about that.
Wow, thank you.
And so for me, like I'm always the type of person where I'm just gonna change that and try to change it and start doing.
Yes.
I'm not gonna do a lot of talking, a lot of chirping about it.
Right.
I'm just gonna like, hey,
Okay.
this is who I am. And I'm gonna start doing all these. Here's the 1,000 things that are gonna be different now after I come back from the sabbatical. There are some things that are gonna be different. My prayer is that it's gonna be different, and so I'm just gonna quietly take action on it and just let God empower me in that. It's like my granddaughter had been watching this video about Joshua, and she was memorizing the scripture about him when God told him to be strong and courageous. And then she was applying that when she was climbing up to get some candy she wasn't supposed to get. She was telling herself to be strong and courageous. Like she was just applying, what she had experienced with God into what she was trying to do. And so for me, that's what I'm trying to just, can I implement? Can I actually put into action the things that were revealed to me without making bold proclamations and then just writing a different story that other people will start to read and think, okay, well, and maybe a year down the road, people will think, yeah, that's different, or maybe they won't realize it, but I'll know, okay, yeah, I did take action there. I'll feel good about that.
One of the biggest things that I've been learning over the last couple years, and I have learned this from you because you always say, to your credit, that the reason why you're able to pass down that wisdom is because you've made that mistake. You stepped in that hole. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
I do appreciate that. Like, it's not like you've always been like, I'm perfect, but like you've modeled and said, like, sometimes you gotta keep that close to the vest because maybe you've spoken out of your youthfulness, out of your passion before, and as we say, your mouth wrote a check you couldn't cash, right?
Yeah.
And so
I had to go to somebody and apologize for something. I did that a lot. Yeah.
And so I've been learning that, and I've also looked at that, and from a psychological perspective, the people have been like, it's really a good practice to do that because when you start making declarative statements, it's like a little win. You know what I'm saying? And so like you kind of let yourself off the hook a little bit. Like when that's why we like to talk about, like, God showed us something, we read something, it's some new thing that's been revealed, and we're excited about it. But yet we haven't really put it into practice.
Yeah.
But like talking about it is almost like a little bit of a win of like you've accomplished it. And so it's better to, like you said, to be quiet about it, like to go to your prayer closet or to keep yourself quiet, I've just been learning that. Like even like I'm running my marathon this Sunday, recording this podcast, and a lot of people are asking me, like, they know that I've talked about times, and I keep asking like, what time you gonna run? I hate answering because I've been trying to keep that in. I guess that's been for me, right? Like I'm not like, I know what goal I have, I know what I was, and I'll tell people the range, but like I'm trying to keep. I'm not trying to give myself that win, and I think I love what you're talking about with that. Is that we're so quick sometimes to come off the mountain, and the mountaintop experience. We always have this, right? And people have it, and they come back, but I don't think people realize the story. Like the mountaintop experience was actually a failure the first time. Like Moses goes up, like think about it. He goes up, he meets with God. He has this great experience. God writes the law. He comes down about ready to explain what God wants to. They've made a golden calf. He breaks those tablets. It doesn't even get, I'm saying that was not, it's like, it was not a good, didn't end well. Like, so like, sometimes you got to keep that stuff to yourself. Like the mountaintop experience is great, but it's what happens in the valley that the hay is made, And I just think that that's such a good point, that you go on a sabbatical, you go out there and God speaks to you, but it's like, put it into practice. Like the sabbatical was the time that gave you an opportunity to get away, to heal, to recover, to get a word, but then to fuel you in doing that thing. Like that's part of what you went there for. Like you went there to get recharged, but also wouldn't or refocus what I'm running to. Now you have that energy. So don't waste it. Just, I mean, I know we're talking about it now because we're wanting people to listen and hear about it.
Right.
And so I'm asking some questions, but I love that the approach is that you're not trying to say, oh man, let me just share all the things God has shown me. You want to be like, let me show you what he's told me. I think that's just a great principle.
Right. And I can't get, all I can see in my head is Moses coming down the mountain with the tablets and then seeing what they were doing and just sliding them behind his back. just sliding them behind his back.
What's going on?
Put them behind a rock. What happened? Oh, nothing. We'll talk about it later. Let me address what's going on here. And then get them ready for it, you know?
So funny.
Yeah, but I don't mind talking about it, but there's certain, I mean, I'm just not going to say all the things,
yes,
just because of that reason. And yeah, I mean, I learned pretty quickly in leadership that, people will hold you accountable to whatever you say.
Yep.
In a good and a bad way. And so be careful what you say.
So say less.
Say less.
Yeah, say less.
And sometimes people will come in and they'll make comments and they'll want you to give a yes or they'll want you to make a commitment.
Correct.
And I'm just not willing to do that a lot of times until I've processed and thought about it and prayed about it, thought about the implications. So I think that's a good principle in life.
Mm-hmm.
Not even in marriages. Like don't make declarative statements that you're not willing to back up, and just instead of making the statement, just start doing that thing.
Yes.
Whatever that thing is, just start doing it, if your spouse, wants the dishes washed, if something as simple as that, maybe you've gotten into some heat about it, just start washing the dishes. Just start. Like, don't say, hey, you know what I'm going to do from now on? I'm going to wash the dishes. Never say that. Because you're not going to do it from now on. You might, but start doing the dishes, and then you start writing a new story. You start writing a new narrative,
and you're doing dishes more than you did.
And then after a while, it might take 2 years, might take 3 years of you predominantly doing the dishes. Then now the narrative your spouse will say to people is, yeah, he or she they generally do the dishes.
Mm-hmm.
And before it was a point of contention,
right? But
you just took action. You never said, hey, I'm going to be different about this. And I just love that, man. I love trying to change things that I know I need to change, and that have been points of contention in the past or issues, even if it's just stuff that I've noticed about myself, and then seeing the result later, seeing people respond to the result, without even knowing that I took intentional action to do that.
Yeah, that's really hard for me. It's one of the things I struggle with is not sharing, because sometimes I feel that like God works in me in a deep level, and I realize it's going to be a long process, and so I know that what he's shown me is not really going to come to pass quickly. So I almost want to just like share the excitement of, man, God spoke to me something deep, but it's a journey.
Yeah,
and so I've had to learn. Sometimes those are okay to share, and certain like it's not hard and fast, but a lot of times it's just better to like, it's a better rule to just be quiet and just do the work and just realize that certain things are going to take a longer period of time. Like I like that, like taking an air, like a sabbatical is just 4 weeks, and you're not going to solve everything in 4 weeks, but it gives you the framework, as you just said, to put into practice healthier rhythms so that next year you're going to be at a place to go deeper in that well. And so like 4 years from now, that fourth sabbatical will probably be exponentially better and deeper than it was now. And that's the process. And I think that's the process we want for a lot of stuff we talk about. The last question I ask you is that what advice would you give me to be chewing on going into my sabbatical in January?
I mean, I think like we talked about with the staff yesterday, that the preparation for a sabbatical and intentionality about it.
That's true.
It's not just a vacation. It's not just time off.
Right.
It's time for that restoring, that establishing, that strengthening, and that confirming that God's going to do. I think, I think figuring out, okay, is there some spiritual knowledge I need to gain from that? And God, where do you want me to go get that? And I think being intentional about a focused place in the Bible, I think is great. I think that was fantastic for me. to go through the book of First Peter over and over again. I think that was fantastic. But I think being intentional about, okay, because everybody's different. Everybody's needs are different. Everybody's emotional needs, everybody's spiritual needs are different. But God, what do you have for me? What do I need to do in preparation for this time? And what's the commitment level that I need to give to this? Because for me, like I share with the staff, part of that scripture about suffering and leadership, and then there's that restoration and that strengthening and establishing and confirming that's going to happen on the end of that, and that's the work that God's going to do. That those things are done to you. They're not things you do for yourself. And so I felt like that there was a call to suffering for me, and so I went through a fast. I did a 3-day fast with nothing but water for 3 days, and I broke the fast on the last Sunday that I had off, and so I got up and cooked breakfast for me and my wife, and it was a great experience to really hurt and suffer in my hunger because I love to eat, especially coming off a vacation where I ate a lot, but every moment where I felt those hunger pains, I had specific points of prayer and focuses of prayer for my family, for my wife, my kids, my granddaughter, for my siblings, for all the staff members, for you, I had specific things that I was praying about, and it gave me a lot of time of intentional, focused prayer, like through my suffering, and it was almost like God, called me to an intentional physical suffering to allow like the final refining to take place, and there was a lot of things in that time that I thought was really beneficial for me too.